October 2024. The air over Beckley, West Virginia, carried a quiet heaviness, the kind that clings to the bones of a town that's seen too much rain, too much waiting. Morning fog curled through the Appalachian ridges like smoke from an old memory. And somewhere beyond the gray horizon, the ground was about to tell a story it had buried for 24 years. It started as any other workday. A construction crew breaking ground on the east edge of town, clearing an abandoned coal loading site for a new shopping plaza, a promise of revitalization, as the mayor called it. The land had slept untouched since the 90s, covered in wild kudzu vines, red clay, and the silent echoes of the industry that once gave this town its name. Tommy Briggs, 34, climbed into his excavator just after sunrise. The diesel engine coughed awake, coughing up a trail of black smoke that drifted across the valley. He'd been on jobs like this before. Long days, short paychecks, moving earth that didn't want to be moved. But that morning, the earth moved back. At 8:52 a.m., the blade of Tommy's caterpillar hit something solid. The sound, a metallic scream against metal, cut through the valley like a warning. He killed the engine, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind that feels like it's listening. When he climbed down to check, his boots sank into the mud. He knelt beside the trench, brushed away the clay with gloved hands, and froze. Beneath the wet soil was silver, not stone, not pipe, but paint. Car paint. His heart started hammering. He cleared a little more, and then he saw it. The outline of a roof, a curve of glass, and a license plate caked in dirt, but still visible. WV4729L. By the time his foreman arrived, the fog had thickened again and crows circled overhead. Within an hour, local police were there. By noon, the West Virginia State Police had taped off the entire area. Yellow lines slicing through the red mud, cameras flashing. Men and women in white Tyvek suits moved like ghosts around a half-buried car. It was a 1998 silver Honda Accord, the body crushed inward, the tires long deflated, the roof sunken under the weight of years. Whoever buried it had done so carefully, intentionally. It was positioned horizontally in a trench roughly 6 feet deep. This wasn't an accident. This was a secret someone had planned to keep forever. When the license number came back over the radio, the younger officers didn't recognize it. But the older ones went still. Registered to a Susan Carter. Beckley address. Reported missing. March 2000, the words hung in the damp air. For the first time in years, the name Susan Carter echoed through a West Virginia police scanner. They all knew what that meant. The case that had haunted Beckley for a generation, the woman and her little girl who had vanished one foggy Sunday and never returned, had just come roaring back from the grave. Forensic teams began their slow, deliberate dance. Hydraulic jacks lifted the Honda inch by inch from its muddy tomb. They didn't yank it free. The car was fragile, the soil inside fused with time. The moment the driver's side door cracked open, the smell hit them first. Not decay that had long passed, but the cold, mineral breath of the earth itself. Inside were bones. 2 sets. The driver's seat held an adult skeleton, the thin glint of a gold wedding band still circling one hand, tarnished but intact. In the back seat, smaller bones. A child. There was something else too. A fragment of pink nylon, its color almost lost to mud, stitched with a single word in fading purple thread. Natasha. No one spoke for several seconds. Not the crime scene techs, not the troopers, not even the young officer who turned away, pressing a hand over his mouth. The valley went still again. It was as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridges and the last of the daylight turned the mud to copper, investigators found something that changed everything. The rear doors of the Honda had been welded shut from the outside. Crude, jagged welds, done quickly but effectively. Whoever sealed that car made sure no one inside could ever get out. By 6 p.m., word had spread. Reporters gathered at the site entrance, their shoes sinking into the mud, cameras flashing against the police tape. Locals stopped their trucks along the road, windows rolled down, watching the glow of floodlights illuminate a grave that had waited nearly a quarter of a century to be found. The old-timers in Beckley murmured to each other, shaking their heads. 24 years, one man said. And all this time, She was right here. Susan Carter and her 10-year-old daughter, Natasha, had been missing since March 12, 2000. The case had been written off decades ago. Just another domestic disappearance. A woman fleeing an abusive husband, trying to start over somewhere far away. But the truth had been lying 3 feet under Beckley's red clay, wrapped in silence. The ground had finally spoken. And now the story it told would unravel everything this town thought it knew about love. Fear, and the kind of evil that hides behind familiar doors. Before we go deeper, take a moment, hit subscribe, share this story, because this isn't just about a mother and daughter found beneath the earth. It's about what happens when a community looks away, and the silence becomes the accomplice. The year was 2000. The air still smelled of coal and rain, and somewhere on a narrow gravel road just outside Beckley, Susan Carter was already planning her escape. March 2000, Beckley, West Virginia. The kind of town where winter doesn't really leave. It just lingers, turning from ice to fog, from fog to cold rain. The mountains pressed in, close, gray and silent, like witnesses who'd seen too much and said too little. Lot 14, Dry Branch Road. A single wide trailer with faded blue siding, one cracked window, and a wooden deck that sagged on one corner. Inside lived Susan Carter, 41 years old, mother of 1, cashier at the Save-A-Lot on Harper Road. People who knew her said she was kind, quiet, the kind of woman who kept her head down and worked hard. But kindness doesn't protect you from cruelty. Susan had a daughter, 10-year-old Natasha, pale-eyed, soft-voiced, an artist at heart. She drew horses, dozens of them, running free through fields she'd never seen. Her teacher said she drew like someone trying to imagine a way out. Every morning before school, Susan brushed Natasha's hair, tied it in a loose ponytail, and made her cereal at the small kitchen table. Outside, the gravel lot was always wet. Mud pooled beneath the rusted Ford truck parked beside their car, the silver Honda Accord that would one day become their coffin. And inside that trailer, behind those paper-thin walls, was a man whose rage filled the space like gasoline waiting for a spark. Michael Carter, Susan's husband. Once a coal miner, now a man broken by injury and bitterness. He'd been out of work since '97, drawing disability checks, drinking the rest. When the mine took his back, it seemed to take the last of his soul with it. Neighbors heard him more than they saw him. His voice would break through the thin walls at night, loud, slurred, angry. The sound of something breaking, a door slamming, then silence, then sometimes a child crying. People said it wasn't their business. Not here, not in this town. But Carol Jenkins, who lived 2 trailers down, saw what others ignored. She noticed the bruises, the kind Susan tried to hide under long sleeves. She saw the way Natasha flinched when her father's truck pulled into the driveway. And one gray morning, she caught Susan outside, loading groceries into her car. "You all right, honey?" Carol asked, voice soft, worried. Susan smiled, that polite, brittle smile people use when they're trying not to break. "I'm fine, just tired." But her eyes told a different story, one that Carol would replay in her mind for years, wishing she'd done more. At Beckley Elementary, the school nurse, Linda Moss, kept notes. February 8th, bruise on left forearm. Child says she fell off bike. February 22nd, bruise on right shoulder. Child became upset when questioned. Case referred to social worker. The social worker never showed. Overworked, underfunded, and with 100 other cases waiting. And so, Susan Carter's silent war went unseen. But she had a plan, quiet, desperate, fragile. For months she'd been saving small bills, a few dollars from every grocery run, hidden in a coffee can behind the water heater. $240 total, enough to fill the car and drive until the road ran out. She told no one except her sister, Margaret Hayes, who lived 40 miles south in Princeton. They met at a McDonald's off the interstate, sitting in Susan's car, windows fogged from the rain. Natasha sat in the back seat, eating fries and drawing on her napkin. "I'm leaving him," Susan whispered. "I can't stay anymore." Margaret reached across the console, gripped her sister's trembling hand. "Then come now. You and Tash can stay with me. Tonight." But Susan shook her head. "He'll find me if I go too soon. I need a plan. I get my tax refund next week. That'll give me enough for a deposit somewhere far. Maybe North Carolina, maybe Ohio." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Susan, please, don't wait." 2 weeks, Susan said. "Just 2 weeks." They both knew those 2 weeks could be dangerous, but neither of them imagined how short they'd really be. March 10th. Susan's tax refund cleared. She withdrew $180 in cash. The bank teller would later remember how she smiled, said she was buying clothes for her daughter. Instead, she drove to Goodwill, bought a duffel bag, and packed it that night. Clothes for both of them, hidden under a blanket in the trunk. That same evening, she made Natasha's favorite dinner, spaghetti with butter and parmesan. No sauce, because Natasha didn't like tomatoes. They sat together at the little kitchen table. Michael was passed out in his recliner, a beer can on the floor, the TV flickering blue light across the room. "Mama," Natasha said quietly, "are we going somewhere?" Susan's fork froze mid-air. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "I saw the bag in the trunk." Susan looked at her daughter, her heart aching with both fear and hope. She reached across the table, touched her small hand. "Maybe someday soon. Would you like that?" Natasha nodded, eyes wide. "Can we go somewhere with horses?" Susan smiled, a real smile this time, the kind she hadn't felt in years. "Yeah, baby, somewhere with horses." 2 days later, that dream would be buried under 6 feet of red clay. The morning of March 12th dawned grey and cold. Fog clung low across the trailer park, and a fine drizzle traced the windows. Susan woke early, careful not to stir Michael, who was snoring in the next room. She moved like someone who'd rehearsed each step in her mind, quiet, deliberate. She made coffee, poured Natasha a bowl of cereal, watched her eat, silent except for the soft crunch of Cheerios. Then, around 9, she heard it, the sound of Michael's boots hitting the floor, his heavy footsteps crossing the hall. He appeared in the doorway, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. "Coffee," he muttered. She poured it, hand steady even as her pulse raced. He drank it in silence, staring out the window. Then, finally, he said, "I'm going out. Ray's working on his truck. Needs help." Susan nodded, trying not to breathe too deeply until the front door slammed. Through the curtain, she watched his truck rumble down the gravel drive, turn, and vanish. Then she turned to her daughter. "Get dressed, baby. We're going out." Natasha blinked, surprised. "Where?" "Just for a drive. Maybe ice cream." Too cold for ice cream, but Natasha didn't argue. She ran to her room and changed into jeans and her purple sweatshirt. Susan packed the last of their things, her heart pounding like it might burst. At 10:05 a.m., she backed the silver Honda out of the driveway. Carol Jenkins, standing on her porch 2 trailers down, waved. Susan waved back, a small, tight gesture. That wave would be the last time anyone saw Susan and Natasha Carter alive. The road into Beckley wound like a gray ribbon through the hills, the trees still bare from winter, branches tangled against the sky. Susan drove slow, both hands gripping the wheel, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. She didn't say much. Natasha sat in the back seat, her pink backpack on her lap, her stuffed bear Charlie tucked inside. The plan was simple. Drive into town, fill the tank, and then keep going, maybe south toward North Carolina, maybe west toward Ohio, anywhere that wasn't here. At 10:23 a.m., security cameras at a 7-Eleven on Harper Road captured a silver Honda Accord pulling up to pump number 3. Susan stepped out, wearing her denim jacket and a floral print blouse. She swiped her debit card, started pumping gas, and glanced toward the road, twice, maybe 3 times, like she was expecting to see someone. Inside the store, the young clerk, Derek Palmer, 19 and working weekends to pay for community college, watched her through the window. He'd later remember the way her hands trembled when she handed him the cash. She bought a pack of Marlboro Lights, a bottle of water, and a small bag of Skittles, the kind Natasha loved. "You okay, Mom?" Derek had asked, noticing her pale face. "Fine," she said, forcing a faint smile. "Just cold." He bagged her things, handed her the receipt, and watched her walk back to her car. She got in, sat still for a moment, staring straight ahead. Then at 10:31 a.m., she pulled out of the lot and turned east on Harper Road. That was the last confirmed sighting of Susan and Natasha Carter. What happened after that drive would become 24 years of silence. By 3:17 p.m., Michael Carter's rusted Ford truck rattled back into the trailer park. He parked in front of Lot 14, expecting the smell of dinner, maybe Natasha watching TV, Susan pretending not to watch the clock. Instead, the trailer was dark, quiet. He unlocked the door, stepped inside. The air felt hollow. "Susan?" he called. Nothing. The kitchen was clean. Dishes from breakfast still in the drying rack. The living room empty except for his recliner and a beer can on the floor. He checked the bedrooms. Natasha's bed was made, her drawings still pinned to the wall, the little lamp with the cracked shade still on. Susan's closet was half full. Her coat still hung there, her makeup bag in the bathroom. But one thing was missing. The duffel bag he'd seen in the trunk days earlier. And in Natasha's room, something else. Her stuffed bear, Charlie, sitting neatly on her pillow. Michael stood there for a long time, staring at the toy. She never went anywhere without it. Then on the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a sunflower, he found the note. "Michael, I can't do this anymore. I'm taking Natasha. Don't come looking for us." Susan, he read it twice, crumpled it in his fist. Then he opened a beer, sat on the couch, and stared at the blank TV. At 6:30 p.m., the phone rang. It was Margaret Hayes, Susan's sister. She'd been calling all day, getting voicemail. "Michael, where's Susan?" she asked. "She's gone," he said flatly. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "She left. Took Natasha. Said she couldn't do this anymore. Michael, where did she go?" "Hell if I know," he said. "Left a note." "That's all I got." Margaret's stomach dropped. "Did you call the police?" Michael gave a short laugh, low, bitter. "Why would I? She left on her own." "I'm coming over," Margaret said, and hung up before he could answer. By the time she arrived, night had fallen. The trailer glowed faintly from the kitchen light. Michael answered the door, wearing sweatpants and that same expressionless stare. "She left this," he said, handing her the crumpled note. Margaret read it once, then looked around the trailer. Everything felt wrong, too still, too clean. She went to Susan's room, saw her winter coat still hanging there, her purse missing, but her makeup bag open on the counter. "Natasha's bear on the bed. She wouldn't leave without this," Margaret whispered, holding it. "Natasha never goes anywhere without her bear." Michael shrugged. Maybe she forgot. "You don't forget your kid's favorite toy. Maybe she was in a hurry." Margaret turned to him, her eyes sharp now. "Where's her car?" "She took it. Have you looked for them?" "She's a grown woman," he said. She made her choice. Margaret felt cold all over. She picked up the phone and called Beckley Police. Officer Jason Trent arrived at 9:42 p.m., young, polite, uncertain. He took their statements, examined the note, walked through the trailer with his flashlight. "Any signs of a struggle?" He asked. "No," Michael said. "She just left." Officer Trent nodded, writing everything down. "Ma'am," he said to Margaret, "has your sister talked about leaving before?" "She was unhappy," Margaret said quietly. "But she wouldn't disappear without telling me." "Did she have money?" "Not much. Maybe a few hundred," the officer sighed. "Without evidence of foul play, we can't do much right now. Adults have the right to leave. 48 hours, he added. If she doesn't contact anyone by then, file a missing persons report. 48 hours. 2 days that would stretch into 2 decades. When the officer left, Margaret stayed. She sat awake on the couch until sunrise, staring at the empty hallway. The stuffed bear sat beside her. Every creak of the trailer felt like a voice whispering that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The next morning, she drove to the police station and filed the report. The clerk barely looked up. Susan Marie Carter, 41, brown hair, blue eyes. Natasha Lynn Carter, 10 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. Vehicle, 1998, Honda Accord, silver. License. BV429L, the clerk, entered it into the National Crime Information Center database and handed her the carbon copy. Margaret stared at the pink form in her hand, a bureaucratic ghost of the sister she'd just lost. Michael Carter gave a single interview 2 days later to the Register Herald, Beckley's local paper. He told them Susan had been planning to leave for weeks, that she'd been unhappy, that he hoped she was safe. The story ran on page 6, beneath an ad for used cars. Headline, Beckley woman, daughter missing after apparent departure. No one thought to question it. No one except Margaret. That week, she drove through Beckley and every town within 50 miles, plastering flyers on telephone poles and gas station windows. Her sister's photo smiled back at her. Tired eyes, gentle smile, the kind of woman who didn't belong in a missing person poster. Days turned into weeks. The Honda was never found. The phone never rang. And behind the quiet walls of Lot 14, Michael Carter kept drinking, kept watching TV, kept telling anyone who asked that Susan had left. But late at night, when no one was watching, he'd step out onto the porch, look toward the dark ridges where the coal site used to be, and stare for a long, long time, as if he knew exactly where she was. Spring came slow to southern West Virginia that year. The mountains stayed gray, the air wet, the days quiet. For Margaret Hayes, every sunrise felt heavier. Another morning without her sister's voice, another day without answers. It had been 4 days since Susan and Natasha vanished, when Margaret realized the Beckley police weren't really looking. No search teams, no press release, no urgency. Just a file marked voluntary disappearance. If they wouldn't search, she would. She drove to Kinko's in Princeton, spent the last of her savings printing 500 flyers. 2 photos, Susan, smiling faintly, and Natasha in her school picture, her hair brushed neatly, her eyes unsure. Beneath the photos, bold letters, missing, Susan Marie Carter, 41, and Natasha Lynn Carter, 10. Last seen March 12, 2000. Beckley, WV, 1998. Silver Honda Accord. License, W4729L. She and her husband Frank drove through every mountain town within 50 miles. Oak Hill, Bluefield, Hinton, every gas station, every grocery store, every truck stop. She taped flyers to telephone poles while the wind tried to tear them away. People shook their heads, polite but distant. Sorry, ma'am, haven't seen them. Some didn't even look at the photo. They'd seen missing posters before. In a place like this, people vanished, sometimes for work, sometimes for love, sometimes just to get away. But Margaret knew better. Susan wasn't gone. She was missing. At the Beckley Police Department, Detective Roy Caldwell was assigned the case by default. Not because he wanted it, but because no one else did. Caldwell was 48, a career cop, tired eyes and thinning hair. He'd seen everything from domestic assaults to drug overdoses. To him, the Carter case looked like another domestic gone sideways. A note. No body, no crime scene. Still, something about it bothered him. The tone of the note, the timing. The bear left behind. He'd seen too many men like Michael Carter, bitter, possessive, angry at the world. On March 18th, he drove out to Dry Branch Road to talk to Michael himself. Michael answered the door in a flannel shirt and sweatpants, a beer already in his hand, though it was barely 10 a.m. The trailer smelled like cigarettes and old food. Caldwell sat at the table, opened his notebook. Mr. Carter, I just want to ask a few questions about your wife and daughter. Michael shrugged. Already told the other cop everything. I know, Caldwell said calmly, but I'd like to hear it again. Michael leaned against the counter. She was unhappy, said she wanted to leave. I left to help my buddy fix his truck. Came home. She was gone. You said she'd been threatening to leave for a while. She'd say it when she got mad. Women say things. Neighbors reported arguments, Caldwell said, flipping through his notes. Loud ones, things breaking, your wife crying. Michael's face tightened. We argued. So what? Every couple argues. Don't mean I hurt her. Caldwell didn't respond. He just watched him. The way Michael's hand clenched the beer can. The way his jaw worked like he was grinding his teeth. Where were you between 10 and 3 that day? Caldwell asked. Ray Dawkins's place. He'll tell you. He did. When Caldwell drove to Ray's a few hours later, the man confirmed it. Said Michael had been there working on a Chevy transmission, drinking beer, talking football. Seemed normal, he said. Left around 3. The timeline fit. Barely. The security footage from the 7-Eleven showed Susan alive at 10:31 a.m. If Michael was at Ray's by 10:45, he couldn't have done anything. But something about it still felt off. The edges didn't fit clean. Caldwell wrote the report, filed it under voluntary disappearance, and moved on to his next case. But the feeling stayed. Like a pebble in his shoe, he couldn't shake loose. Margaret, meanwhile, refused to stop. She called Susan's bank. The last transaction had been the $180 withdrawal 2 days before she vanished. No other charges. Her account untouched. If she left on her own, Margaret told Caldwell. How's she buying food? Gas? Anything? Caldwell sighed. Maybe she had cash we don't know about. She had $240, Margaret said sharply. That's not enough to disappear with your child. He nodded but didn't answer. There was nothing he could do without evidence of a crime, so Margaret did what police wouldn't. She searched rivers, rest stops, old highways. She walked the banks of the new river, staring down into the dark water, afraid of what she might see, or not see. Every night she called the Beckley station. Every night they said the same thing. No updates, ma'am. Her husband Frank would try to talk her down. You can't keep doing this, honey. You'll make yourself sick. I can't stop, she'd whisper. She's my sister. By May, the case had vanished from the headlines. The Register-Herald ran one small follow-up buried near the classifieds. Beckley mother, daughter still missing after 2 months. Detective Caldwell had other cases. Drugs, burglaries, a homicide in Oak Hill. The Carter file stayed on his desk for a week before sliding into the cold case drawer. Margaret kept searching anyway. She contacted local TV stations, begged them to run a story. One agreed. A 60-second segment on the 6 o'clock news. Susan's picture flashed on screen for less than 15 seconds. The hotline received 3 calls, 2 pranksters, and 1 woman who thought she saw Susan in Tennessee. It wasn't her. By summer, the flyers had started to fade. The ink ran when it rained. The edges curled under the weight of humidity. The world moved on. But Margaret didn't. In June, she hired a private investigator, a retired state trooper named Leonard Walsh. He charged $75 an hour. Margaret and Frank took out a loan against their house. Walsh worked 3 weeks. He talked to everyone. The neighbor Carol Jenkins, the store clerk Derek Palmer, the teachers at Beckley Elementary. He even managed to pull the cell tower data from Susan's old phone. The last ping was at 10:47 a.m. on March 12th, on Daesh. Route 3, heading east, the same direction Michael would later claim he never went. And then, nothing. Silence. Walsh's report was clinical. No signs of abduction or foul play. The vehicle unrecovered. Financial accounts dormant. Possible voluntary disappearance. When he handed the file to Margaret, she read it once, closed it, and whispered, "She's dead." Frank's hand rested on her shoulder. "You don't know that." But she did. She'd known it since the first night she held Natasha's bear and waited for a phone call that never came. By winter, the flyers were gone. The phone stopped ringing. In Beckley, the the town that once whispered Susan Carter's name, forgot her. Detective Caldwell retired in 2002. Before he left, he pulled the Carter file one last time, skimmed the yellowing pages, and stared at the photo of Susan and Natasha. He couldn't prove it, but he knew. He placed the file back in the box marked Cold Cases, Raleigh County, and shut the drawer. Somewhere outside town, under red Appalachian clay, Susan and Natasha Carter were waiting, and the ground was still keeping their secret. Time rolled on as it always does, steady and cruel. 24 years slipped past like fog through the valleys. The world changed, the mines closed, the trailers on Dry Branch Road were torn down, and the people who remembered Susan and Natasha Carter grew old or moved away. By 2010, their faces, once printed on flyers, taped to gas pumps and diner windows, had faded into memory. In Beckley, the story of the missing mother and daughter became another whispered legend. The kind people mentioned when the nights got too long and the silence too heavy. But in Princeton, 40 miles south, Margaret Hayes never stopped believing. She was 60 now, her hair silvered, her walk slower, but her mind sharp as ever. The photos of Susan and Natasha sat on her mantel beside the urn of her late husband Frank, who'd passed of a heart attack in 2019. Every March 12th, the anniversary, she lit a candle. Every year she whispered the same words, "I haven't forgotten you." Even when cancer came for her, she kept the ritual. A woman bound by love and grief, waiting for a truth that might never come. Michael Carter, on the other hand, grew into a shadow of himself. His hair turned gray, his back curved from the old mining injury. His second wife, Brenda, left him after 14 years of quiet misery. He never talked, she told a friend later. Never about them. Never about anything. It was like living with a ghost. He lived alone on Baker Street, a small house at the edge of Beckley, blinds always closed. The few neighbors who saw him described a man who muttered to himself, who still wore his work boots even when mowing the yard, who sometimes stood outside at night staring into the trees as if something out there was watching back. The town moved on, but the earth hadn't forgotten. October 2024 arrived cold and gray, with the smell of rain hanging heavy in the air. A construction project had been delayed for months, a new shopping plaza meant to bring life back to Beckley's east side. On October 8th, the crew finally broke ground. At sunrise, the machines rolled in, excavators, bulldozers, dump trucks, cutting into the same red clay that had once swallowed the town's coal and carried its stories underground. Tommy Briggs, 34, was the lead excavator operator. He'd grown up in Beckley, played around the old rail yards as a kid. The same place his grandfather used to tell stories about miners, black dust, and ghosts that lived in the mountains. He'd never imagined he'd find one. At 8:52 a.m., the steel blade of his excavator hit something solid, metal, hollow, heavy. He stopped, killed the engine, and climbed down to check. The morning was quiet, except for the low buzz of cicadas and the distant hum of traffic. He knelt beside the trench, brushed away the red clay with his gloves, and froze. Beneath the dirt, silver paint, curved metal, glass half sunk into the earth. A car roof. The foreman came running. So did the others. Within 20 minutes, police cruisers lined the access road. By noon, the yellow tape was up, cameras were flashing, and the words, "possible homicide scene," echoed over the radios. The car was buried deliberately, 6 feet down, perfectly placed. The license plate, once cleaned, read WV4729L. For the first time in 2 decades, the name Susan Carter lit up a state police database. Detective Megan Cross, 38, was called in from Charleston. She'd only been with the cold case unit for 2 years. Sharp, methodical, the kind of detective who noticed what others missed. She didn't know the name when it came across her desk. But when she pulled the file, thick, yellowed, edges worn soft, she felt the weight of history in her hands. Inside were old photos, police reports, a copy of the note Susan had left on her refrigerator, and Margaret's letters. Dozens of them, each one begging for updates that never came. Cross drove straight to Beckley. The scene was surreal. Floodlights cutting through fog, State police in Tyvek suits crouched beside a half-buried vehicle that had been sealed in silence for nearly a quarter-century. When the Accord was finally lifted free, the metal screamed in protest, like something alive being dragged from the dirt. It was crushed inward, its paint eaten by rust. But the shape was unmistakable. They transported it to Charleston for examination. 3 days later, the results came back. Inside the car were 2 skeletons. The adult was in the driver's seat, bones wrapped in fragments of denim and floral fabric. On one hand, a thin gold band, wedding ring tarnished but intact. In the back seat, a smaller skeleton. Beneath the bones lay a rotted pink backpack. The nylon fabric was stiff and fragile but still there, and stitched across the front in fading purple thread was a single word: Natasha. Inside the backpack was a notebook filled with crumbling pencil sketches, horses, always horses, and a small stuffed bear, matted with clay but still smiling: Charlie. The lab ran DNA on both sets of remains, comparing them to samples Margaret Hayes had given back in 2000. The match came back at 99.97%, Susan and Natasha Carter, missing for 24 years. Found together, but it wasn't just the discovery that turned tragedy into murder. It was what the forensics revealed next. The rear doors of the Honda Accord had been welded shut from the outside. The welds were rough, done fast, using industrial equipment. The driver's side lock had been forced, the ignition wires cut. Whoever had done this had trapped them, sealed them inside, and buried them alive or dead. The soil around the car contained traces of diesel fuel and lubricant, the kind used in heavy machinery. Someone had dug a grave with an excavator, and now, the earth had finally given up its secret. On October 18th, Detective Cross drove to Princeton. Margaret Hayes opened the door herself, frail now, but still sharp-eyed. When Cross showed her the badge, Margaret's legs nearly gave out. "We found them," Cross said softly. Margaret didn't speak for a long moment. Her hand went to her mouth. Then she whispered, "Where?" "Beckley," Cross said. "They were buried at an old coal loading site." Margaret's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. "I knew," she said quietly. "I always knew," the detective hesitated. "There's something else. We believe it wasn't an accident." Margaret turned her head, her voice steady now, cold and certain. "It was Michael, wasn't it?" "We're investigating all leads," Cross said carefully. "It was him," Margaret said. "It was always him." Outside, the October wind pushed through the trees. The sky over Princeton turned the color of steel. For 24 years, Margaret Hayes had carried a promise: "I'll find you." That night, for the first time, she allowed herself to whisper something new: "You can rest now." The news spread through Beckley like wildfire. Bodies found at construction site identified as missing mother and daughter from 2000. Every local TV station carried it. Every radio show replayed it. Every diner whispered about it between coffee refills. After 24 years, the Carter case had come back, louder, darker, and demanding justice. Detective Megan Cross sat in her Charleston office the next morning, the Carter file open in front of her. The photos were hard to look at. The bones, the pink backpack, the rusted metal of the Honda, its doors welded shut like a coffin. But it was the welding that bothered her most. That detail screamed industrial. Whoever did it had access to heavy machinery, welding gear, and enough privacy to bury a car without being seen. She flipped through the original witness reports. One name stood out again and again: Michael Carter. The husband, the one who'd claimed Susan just left. Cross had seen that type before. Quiet, controlling men who thought the world owed them something. She requested the original statements, his alibi, even the 7-Eleven footage. Then she called Raleigh County Sheriff's Office. "I need a current address for a Michael Carter," she said. When the deputy read it off, her pulse quickened. Same town, same county. He'd never left Beckley. That afternoon, she drove down I-77 through the winding hills, the autumn leaves burning gold against the gray sky. The road curved past old mines and rusted signs, ghosts of a past that never really died. Michael Carter lived in a small white house on Baker Street, one story, peeling paint, a sagging porch. The yard was scattered with rusting tools, an old lawnmower, and the shell of a Chevy truck that hadn't run in years. When she knocked, the door opened slow. Michael Carter stood there, 70 now, his hair thin, his eyes bloodshot but sharp. "You the one from the paper?" he said, voice rough. "I'm Detective Cross," she said, showing her badge. "Mind if I ask a few questions about your wife and daughter?" He didn't move for a moment. Then he stepped aside. "They been dead a long time. Ain't much to say." Inside the house smelled of dust and cigarettes. Old beer cans lined the counter. A faded photo of Susan and Natasha hung on the wall, crooked, yellowed, the frame cracked. Cross sat across from him at the kitchen table. "You filed the missing person report back in March 2000, right?" "I didn't. Her sister did." "You said Susan left a note." He reached into a drawer, pulled out a photocopy of it, folded and creased. "That one." She studied it, the handwriting shaky but not unfamiliar. Forensics had already confirmed something interesting. The indentation pressure was inconsistent. The note had been traced. "Mind if I ask where you were that day?" "Helping a buddy." "Ray Dawkins. Told the cops back then?" "Right. Ray confirmed that. But here's the thing. His property was 3 miles from the coal loading site where your wife's car was found." Michael's eyes flickered. Just for a second. "That's a hell of a coincidence," Cross said softly. He looked away, lit a cigarette. "World's full of coincidences. Did you ever work construction?" "Used to. Welded underground when I was younger." She nodded slowly. "You still have your equipment?" He exhaled smoke. "Sold it years ago." Cross let the silence stretch. She watched the way his hands shook, not from age, but from nerves. Then she leaned in slightly. "Michael, we found weld marks on the car doors. Rough fast, same pattern as the ones used in the old Beckley mine shafts." He said nothing, just stared at the ashtray. Finally, she stood. "If you think of anything that might help us, give me a call." She slid her card across the table and walked out, but she didn't leave town. That night, Cross met with Sheriff Darnell, a local who'd been a rookie when the case first went cold. Together they revisited the old evidence, the cell phone data, the timestamps, the bank records. At 10:47 a.m. on March 12, 2000, Susan's phone pinged near Route 3, a few hundred yards from the coal yard that later became the construction site. Michael's alibi placed him at Ray Dawkins's place, less than a mile away. Cross leaned back in her chair. "He didn't bury them somewhere random," she said. "He buried them where he worked. Where he knew no one would look." Sheriff Darnell nodded grimly. "Ray's dead now, passed in 2011. We can't confirm if he helped or not. But someone welded those doors," Cross said. "Someone who knew how to trap a secret." 2 days later, she returned to Baker Street, this time with a warrant. They searched Michael's shed first. It was cluttered with junk, rusted tools, a broken generator, old gas cans. But buried beneath a tarp was something else, a welding torch, acetylene tanks, and a spool of wire still marked Beckley Mine Supply Co. The serial number matched equipment stolen from the mine site in late 1999. When she showed him the evidence, Michael's face went pale. "That don't mean nothing," he muttered. "I just kept it after they shut the mine." "Right," Cross said quietly. "And somehow, the same equipment ended up sealing your wife and daughter in a car buried 2 miles from where you worked." He didn't answer, just stared at the floor, jaw clenched. That night, the warrant expanded. They took soil samples from his property, comparing them to the clay found on the car. The composition matched, iron-rich red with coal dust residue unique to Beckley's East Ridge. DNA swabs came next. One hair found in the trunk lining, short gray, male. The match returned 3 days later. Michael Carter, 99.9%. When Cross returned to arrest him, he was sitting on his porch, cigarette burning down between his fingers. He didn't resist. "You know why I'm here," she said. He nodded once. Guess it finally came up. As she cuffed him, he whispered something so quiet she almost didn't hear. "She was going to take my little girl." Cross froze. "You mean your little girl, Natasha?" He shook his head, eyes empty. "No, my little girl." In the interrogation room, he said little, At first, nothing at all. Then, after hours of silence, a few words. She packed that car. Said she was leaving. Said I'd never see her again. He stared at the wall. Couldn't let her do that, not to me. Not to my kid, so you killed them? Cross asked. His jaw tightened. I didn't mean to. But the evidence told a different story. The welding, the burial, the silence that lasted 24 years. When the confession finally came, it wasn't loud. It was weary. I drove her out there. Said we'd talk. She cried. The kid was in the back seat. I don't know how it happened. I just did it. Then I made sure no one would ever find them. Cross sat still, her pen frozen above the paper. You buried them alive? She asked quietly. He didn't answer. Just stared down at his hands. The arrest made national headlines. West Virginia cold case cracked after 24 years. Locals lined the courthouse steps. Margaret Hayes was there, wrapped in a shawl, trembling but resolute. When officers led Michael Carter past her, she didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, one last time, and said, You took everything from us. And now you can face God for it. Michael didn't look back. Inside, under the harsh fluorescent lights, Detective Cross watched him sign his confession. Some crimes, she thought, never really stay buried. Not when the earth remembers. And in Beckley, the ground had finally spoken. The trial of Michael Carter began in early March 2025, nearly 25 years to the day after Susan and Natasha disappeared. Snow dusted the hills around Beckley, the courthouse steps slick with ice. Reporters filled the sidewalks, their breath fogging in the cold air. To the world, this was justice long overdue. But to the people who had lived through it, to Margaret Hayes, it was something else entirely. A reckoning that had taken half a lifetime to arrive. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than it looked on television. The air heavy, every creak of a chair echoing like a drumbeat. Michael Carter sat at the defense table in a gray suit that hung loose on his frame. Age had carved deep lines across his face. He looked less like a monster now and more like a man hollowed out by his own sins. But Margaret knew better. Evil doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it wears the face of the man next door. Detective Megan Cross took the stand first. She spoke with the calm precision of someone who knew every detail by heart. The soil samples, the weld marks, the DNA, the cell tower ping. When the prosecutor asked what she thought the motive was, she didn't hesitate. Control, she said. He didn't want to lose them. So he decided no one else would ever have them either. The jury stared at her in silence. Then came the forensic pathologist. Her testimony was clinical, horrifying. The skeletons showed no gunshot wounds, no knife marks, no broken bones. But the position of the bodies told the truth. Susan's hand was gripping the door handle from the inside. Natasha's smaller bones were found curled against the window. They hadn't died instantly. They'd fought for air. In the gallery, someone sobbed softly. Margaret didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the man who'd once promised to love her sister till death do us part. He'd kept that promise, just not in the way anyone imagined. When it was the defense's turn, they tried to rewrite the story. They claimed it was an accident, that Michael had snapped during an argument, panicked, buried the car to hide what he'd done. But the evidence said otherwise. You don't weld doors shut in a panic. You don't bring an excavator to an accident. You don't wait 24 years to confess unless you're hiding the truth. The prosecution called their final witness, Margaret Hayes. She walked slowly to the stand, her steps small but steady. The courtroom went quiet. Her voice was soft at first, trembling, but it grew stronger as she spoke. My sister was gentle, she said. She believed people could change. She believed she could save him. But you can't save a man who doesn't want saving. I begged her to leave, and when she finally did, he made sure she couldn't. She paused, her gaze locked on Michael. He thought he buried her forever. But the earth remembered. God remembered. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air felt still. After 6 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood, holding a folded sheet of paper. On all counts, first-degree murder of Susan Carter and first-degree murder of Natasha Carter, they found Michael Carter guilty. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras clicked, but Margaret heard none of it. She was staring at the man who had destroyed her family, watching the faint tremor in his jaw as the verdict sank in. When the judge asked if he wished to speak before sentencing, Michael stood slowly. His voice was rough, uneven. "I never meant for it to happen," he said. "I loved them." Margaret's voice cut through the silence from the gallery. "No, you didn't. You owned them. That's not love." The judge's gavel struck once, twice. "Michael Carter, you are hereby sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole." The courtroom exhaled. The sound of chains clicked as deputies led him away. Outside, the cold wind swept through the courthouse steps. Reporters surrounded Margaret, microphones flashing like lightning. "Ms. Hayes, do you feel justice was served?" She looked up at the gray sky, her breath visible in the cold. "Justice," she said quietly, "doesn't bring them back. But it lets them rest." And then she walked away, slow, deliberate, the last surviving Carter leaving behind 25 years of silence. Spring came again to Beckley. The red clay thawed. Grass grew over the place where the old coal site once stood. A new shopping plaza went up, bright and clean, people parking their cars over the very earth that had once held a secret. Few knew what lay beneath, but the land did. The ground always remembers. Margaret visited that spot one last time in April. She carried 2 small bouquets, one for her sister, one for her niece. The site was fenced now, paved over, but she laid the flowers near the edge anyway. "I found you," she whispered, "and I'll see you again someday." Her hands trembled as she placed the stems in the dirt. Then she sat for a long while, listening to the wind move through the hills, the same wind that had carried their names all these years. Later, she mailed Detective Cross a letter. "Just 1 page. You gave me back my sister. I can breathe again." Cross kept it folded in her desk drawer, a reminder of why she did what she did. For all the stories still buried under silence, waiting to be found. In June 2025, a plaque was placed outside the new shopping plaza, commissioned by a local victims advocacy group. It read, "In memory of Susan Marie Carter, 1959-2000, and Natasha Lynn Carter, 1990-2000. May their story remind us to listen, to the missing, to the silenced, to the unseen. Justice, though slow, will always find its way home." At the dedication, the sky was soft blue, the kind of day Natasha might have drawn if she'd lived long enough. Children played nearby, laughter carrying over the parking lot. Margaret sat in the front row, wrapped in a shawl, tears streaking her cheeks but her smile calm. She whispered something no one else heard. "You're free now." That night, the lights of Beckley shimmered faintly against the ridges. The town had changed, new stores, new faces, but some memories don't fade. They just rest in the soil, deep and patient, waiting for the right moment to speak. And when the wind sweeps across those hills, you can almost hear it. A soft voice, a child's laughter. Carried through time, the mountains never forget, the ground remembers, and sometimes it tells the truth.